Careful what you say.
Exactly. Put your hand on a Bible, whether it means anything or not. Okay, here we go. And let's see, this is what I want to share. And that's the first slide, isn't it? Okay. Now we play from start. And I hope you all are seeing. Let's see, we're display, use slideshow. That's what I want to do. Okay, I turn you over to Ramsey. You all got all the notices ad nauseum, so no introduction required.
No introduction required. My gosh, yeah. You need to tell me who I am. That's I wake up in the morning and I'm not sure. Okay, if you've been paying attention to John's emails, the focus for a couple of weeks here is the 2 issues ago special report in the Economist magazine with a sort of a long 13-page challenge or explanation of how China is intending to challenge the old world order. Old world order, of course, is not the real old world, but the world order that is often talked about after World War II, created by the victors, but mostly the West. And the fact that China is going to argue that, that's been quite self-serving for the West. And we Chinese would like to see that reoriented and changed. And if you don't do it voluntarily, we're going to help change it for you. So we thought, for those that have never been through this, and some of you have been through it ad nauseum, but maybe it's useful to review again. Just what was this old world order or post-World War II order that historians will argue served for world peace quite well for a little bit of time, maybe 30 years, maybe less, was surely self-serving to some degree as well, but has been in disarray for some period of time. Choose your favorite date when that disarray began. So the intention here is to rather quickly go through some of the aspects of that post-World War II order that was established starting at Bretton Woods, even before the war was over. So here we go. And hands up if anyone, you got the usual arrangement. Anytime along the line, just put your hand up and ask a question. Don't wait till the end. This shouldn't go on that long anyway. And the hope is that we have some discussion like we did last week, which was quite good. So I appreciated this. I think it's almost in the first line of that 13-page essay in The Economist, where the author suggests the world was sort of full of revulsion at the industrialized, racially justified savagery of the Second World War. It was just bloody awful. And it had started in the West. And the intention was let's try and not have this ever happen again. Just to review some of this is not necessary for any of you, I suppose, but just to sort of set the tone. I mean, 60 million people dead, 20 million of those Russians, 20 more of them Chinese, million now, and 20 million more. How many? 6 million Jews and so forth. Almost as many people that had no place to live, like Ukraine and Syrians and people in Central Africa these days because of global warming. If you just take Warsaw, Poland, 1.3 million as the start of the war, a whole, and many fewer left as the war ends. Berlin basically a devastated city. I mean, what's going on in Ukraine right now is pretty awful, no doubt, but compared to Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Berlin, Tokyo, this was pretty industrial mass murder. I mean, one bomb, one would have thought that one bomb was enough. Two, in any case, Japan had gone through the same thing. There was the grotesqueness of the Holocaust. Happily, there was some accountability, some serious accountability. A bunch of these guys killed themselves before they went on trials. Others were hung and then burned inside of Dachau just to prove the point. And so it had been awful. And to the credit of those that were trying to organize it, the argument that we can't let this happen again, which was a whole lot better than the idiocy after World War I, and which almost set up World War II, is rather laudable. That there was an intention to not let this happen again. So this is the so-called order that was established after World War II. Some various aspects of that, and anyone that wants to say, well, you forgot this, you forgot that. Well, of course, there's a ton of stuff left out. But just to review a few of these aspects, Bretton Woods happens in a ski resort in New Hampshire even before the war is over. By 1945, it's obvious that that Hitler's going to be beat. Japan probably. So they're already planning, they being the West, and a few others are already planning what to do. I'm going to leave that for last as we run through this, because to my mind, this is the most important of the various items here. United Nations is going to get established. This time we're going to not only join, but be fundamental in setting it up. The Truman Doctrine, that's maybe not so. That's part of the order, unfortunately. At least some of us would argue, unfortunately, not necessarily a needed thing that happens after World War II. Comiform, Comecons, so Stalin's reaction, the Marshall Plan. I'm going too fast. The Marshall Plan, NATO, Warsaw Pact. I think most of you know all this stuff. The Bandung Conference, most people don't know this. I throw it in because I think it matters. And then, of course, the EU itself, which is going to get, the EU is not going to become the EU until 1993. But the outlines of something called the EU are already in people's minds as the war is over, and we can run through the creation of that a bit as well. The United Nations, we can all be cynical about how ineffectual it might be, but it's sure a lot better than not having anything whatsoever at all. It has certainly produced some enormous benefits in terms of education, nutrition, this and that. As far as maintaining peace, maybe not, but at least it's an organization there to help. You look at the Security Council, there's the Security Council. This is, some don't know this. I mean, you say, wait a minute, I thought it's only five members of the Security Council. Well, no, there's 15 members of the Security Council. It's the reason we talk about 5 is because there's 5 permanent members. The other 10 are, they don't rotate through, they have to be voted in. The voting occurs under circumstances that I didn't bother reviewing. And I'm not even sure that this is up to date because this is a 2020 review, but it is interesting. The other countries that get to be part of the Security Council, what do the 5 members, the permanent 5 have that the other 10 don't? Well, you all know the answer. They have a veto power, and the others don't. And that veto power is subject to all sorts of blame game. But the Chinese, as we learned in that review, are delighted to have the veto power. And we've been delighted to have that veto power occasionally ourselves. So whatever. It is, at this stage of the game, I think we all surely will acknowledge that the idea that France and the UK are still on that permanent 5 is now way out of date. And maybe Russia too. Where's India? India's not even a member of the other 10. Although and Germany and this and that. Okay. The Truman Doctrine. Now, this is somewhat more controversial. This became part of that post-Cold War order, for better or for worse. I would argue for worse. It's an interesting question. What's the Truman Doctrine? In 47, Truman goes to the U.S. The House of Representatives and gives a speech saying the world has got to choose now. This is the Cold War nonsense, the Cold War logic nonsense. That's my word. That humanity's got to either choose. We're going to choose freedom or we're going to choose terror and oppression. That terms that are still familiar to us. And he says, we in the United States are going to side with freedom, and we will aid any people anywhere on the planet that are trying to fight this totalitarian stuff coming from the Soviet Union. Now it's China. There's some background to that. The background, some of you are aware of this. This is pretty well documented. I mean, Harry Truman, this is 1947. In 1947, the United States is, of course, in recession. Of course, the United States is in recession. Everybody else is in recession, too. when wars are over, you go into recession, because all the huge spending that is based on enormous debt that you've put into your economy during the war is not necessary anymore. So you back off that absurd amount of spending on arms and subsidies of industries that probably needed to go bankrupt, yada, 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 and so your recession. For Harry Truman in 1947, that's a real problem, because he'd like to be elected president in 48. And if the country is still in recession in 48, there's no way he's going to be elected. As we all know, it's surprising that he doesn't get elected. Everyone's seen the Chicago Tribune headlines of Truman losing. Truman needs to get the United States out of recession. And the argument goes, particularly from Vandenberg, who's a Republican, if you really want to get the Cold War, get us out of recession, you need to come up with military spending again. And there's a convenient excuse. Communists are about to win in Greece and Turkey. They've got nothing to do with Stalin, it turns out, but you can pretend they have everything to do with Stalin. And Truman wants to spend some money to push back on these communist victories in those, at least in Greece. And Vandenberg says there's no way in hell that the U.S. Congress is going to vote for this kind of spending after the huge debt that we've incurred after World War II, unless you scare the hell out of people and the senators get phone calls from their constituents, say, what are we doing? We're going to have Russians in under our bed in about 5 weeks. Well, you know, this is familiar stuff for those of us that live forward. It works. It works. And so we come up with the Marshall Plan, which is a fair amount of money, quite a bit actually, in a certain sense. But more importantly, as far as the industrial, and as far as the recession goes, we restart the military spending that was worked during World War II. And this recession is over. Truman pulls out an election, a strange election win in 48. I'm probably overdoing this for some of you that are sick and tired of hearing about it, but this is pretty widely respected history these days. So we all talk about are well aware of the Marshall Plan. It's largesse to some degree, but again, it's part of us getting out of the recession, because all the money we're going to give to France and other countries in Europe is going to come back to the United States anyway. There's no other economy going. If they need refrigerators, they're going to buy US refrigerators. And so the money recycles to the US. That's not a bad thing. It helps get Europe out of recession as well. Here's a headline from the foreign policy last year. Biden's language regarding China now, not Russia, certainly sounds like some of the same. You know, China is the threat. We've got to stand up to China, yada, yada, yada. And if you're a Chinese, you'd say, yeah, see, do you see why we're bothered by this? I mean, you're claiming that we're the threat. Isn't this more of the Cold War? Well, we can talk about this next week, and we don't get into this week. Is it more fear mongering on our part than reality, or is China really that much of a threat? Okay, the Marsh. For those of you that have never seen this money, this is actually somewhat interesting. We do devote an awful lot of money to the Marshall Plan. Most of it's just given away to various countries. But in terms of real spending money, I mean, look at the cost of German unification. Every bit of it borne by West German taxpayers to reunify with East Germany. Something like $2 trillion over 10 years. I mean, you want to talk about real money. If you really wanted to go out and really remake the world and really help people in need, it's got to be a whole lot more money than that. Yeah. And this is Germany alone. This is like 46 million German taxpayers in West Germany gifted to East Germany to get them up to speed to be part of Germany. Okay, that's preaching, but it's of some value. Comiform, Comic-Con, Soviet. We are willing to give money to the Soviet Union in the Marshall Plan, and Stalin says not a chance in the world. We're going to run our own show. Comma form, there's his reaction to some degree to the Marshall Plan. It just leftover Communist International, leftover from Third International, that we're going to arrange for a common point of view of all communist governments under our thumb. Comic-Con is more of the reaction to the Marshall Plan. There's going to be Soviet assistance to all those countries that need Soviet assistance to maintain our friendship with them in East Europe and frankly, places like Central Asia that we're going to visit next year. And Central Asia, if you would still be happy to get some of that money, there's many of those countries are still in trouble. Not Turkmenistan, it's got oil. So this is part of that Cold World order, and one could argue, well, this is not orderly. This is the Cold War, and there was always this threat of danger. Notice it never really spilled over into any real serious fighting, at least that we were involved in. NATO versus Warsaw Pact. Well, of course, we know that NATO's probably been a good thing, but the Warsaw Pact, it will be the Soviets' answer to stand up to NATO. You communist countries, Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, have got to be militarily on the side of us, the Soviet Union. NATO is on the side of the West. We're still having that argument. The Warsaw Pact doesn't exist anymore, but now China exists, and China's got friends. So there's some analogy there. The Bandung Conference. Some of you maybe remember this, or maybe don't remember. I didn't remember it. When it happened in 1955, I didn't have a clue. I was wondering if the Orioles could stop being in last place in the American League East. But this was an attempt by all these unaligned countries, most were still colonies, to say, you know, we don't want to play the Cold War game. We would like to voice a third opinion here and say, you know, we count too. And notice that China was part of that conference. Organized by the Indonesians, held in Indonesia. There was only 44 countries because if you look at Africa there, it shows all these countries there. Well, they were not countries in 1955.
Ramsey, can I just throw in
a
little riff on one word you just used?
Yeah.
Third. So we'd like to add a third opinion. Oh my God. The other day, I used the term third world in front of the residents that I still have a seminar with every week, and it is, Dr. Lee, we don't say that anymore. And I said, what? Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Well, you got John's, if you heard John's point, that's we were raised on that stuff. The first world, of course, the free world. The second world was the communist world. The third world was everybody else, which was the developed world.
I couldn't respond initially spontaneously, but the next week I told them all about the Bandung Conference.
Good for you. Good for you. Good for you. I mean, there's some of the people at the Bandung Conference.
I showed that slide.
Well, there you go. And how many out there can identify all 5 of those people? You know, let's start way over on the left. That we all know who that is. That's Nehru. Anybody know the black guy? He's going to be the first president of the first African country to become independent, Ghana. This is Nkrumah. The tall middle guy, everyone knows, surely, Nasser. The next guy moving to the right is the host of the conference from Indonesia, Sukarno, who we will help overthrow. And the last guy on the right, this is quite a famous guy. We all know who this is, right?
And we went to his resort and had pastry in the cafe.
John and Iko brought Janet and I pastry and this up in Lake Bled, which is now in Slovenia. Tito, Marshal Tito. Okay. But notice that. I mean, Tito's saying, I'm not part of the second world. There's another point of view out there. Okay, the EU itself, on the way to the EU. Again, I apologize for those that have heard this 1,000 times. It's somewhat useful. It starts, the idea has already been there as World War II ends, or as it's playing out among a couple leaders in France and Italy, the guys that get the credit for getting this going. But the first iteration is the European Coal and Steel Community. These 6 countries, if you're willing to call Luxembourg a country, I guess it is. other than a tax haven, but I guess it's a country too. Say, look, let's cooperate on the price of and the production of coal and steel rather than compete. This economic competition is useful to a small degree, but some of that economic competition got way, way, way out of hand. So let's sort of cooperate on quotas so that all of our countries have jobs and all of our countries have some steel, the best quality steel. Britain was in, and Britain's not allowed in at this stage. The UK is not allowed in for reasons of France being ticked off at them. The next iteration is in 57. This is the Treaty of Rome. The name of the treaties doesn't matter whatsoever, but the experiment with the European Coal and Steel Committee goes so well. Says, let's let other countries in, and now let's work on getting rid of tariff barriers and other competition on everything we can come up with. So it won't just be coal and steel, it will be all sorts of items, French wine, this and that and so forth, that we are trading. We have more free trade across borders. Who wants in? And now the UK, you got a map there. The UK is allowed in, and Denmark's in, and for God, somehow Greece gets in, which is odd. Portugal and Spain, that's in 57. And this goes on and on and on for quite some time. By 93, there's been this discussion to say, let's go full bore now. Let's give it a shot. It's actually talking about a political union to some degree as well. And the negotiation, you can see up in the right-hand corner, that's the Maastricht Treaty. It's a rather large document. And this, the critics would say, this is one of the problems. It's so damn bureaucratic, all these little niggly-piggly rules that drive us crazy, and we have to all agree to those rules. And the response to that is, well, if you don't have a rules-based society, you just go back to what we had before World War II and before World War I. We just beggar your neighbor. Everyone tries to compete to get a leg up and beat the other guy. The other guy just does the same thing, and pretty soon you're in depression and recession and playing fear and hate your neighbor and yada, yada, yada. So the Maastricht Treaty goes into effect in 93. There's rules about having European citizenship. Anyone can have a job in the rest of Europe. And there's even discussion of, let's say, we got to move toward a single currency. They tried something that's not going to be a real currency at first. It doesn't work. And so, I do want to, this is, and they adopt. I like the word, if you've never heard the English translation of the Ode to Joy out of German, some of the words are really rather wonderful. I can't read them all because John's going to help me. You can read them. I can't because some of the screen is blocked. But don't worry. Well, you can read them. There we go. Oh, let's reunite. All that custom has divided, all men become brothers. Now, this has got a male thing to it, but if you've heard Ode to Joy played on the appropriate thing, it ought to bring tears to your eyes. It's really quite a stunning piece of work. And you got to help me, Clem. Hold on, John's helping me. And now we're going to no. Yeah, okay. And so the EU enlargement, you're all well aware of. One can argue that it's gone too fast. There's been some problematic countries. Greece is surely one of them, Bulgaria. And Turkey is still in theory a candidate. So is Macedonia. So is Croatia. You can see that Serbia is not. And Norway says we don't need to get in because we got all this oil. But at least they're fighting more on the soccer field than they are in three. And then the euro, the euro is established. Someone else coming in is John checking. Be patient for a minute here while John admits anybody who's trying to get in.
Welcome, Bob Oxenborough.
Bob's. Oh, I'm glad Bob's coming in.
Yeah.
I'm going to need Bob in about 5 minutes here, so or 2 minutes or whatever. And the euro, you remove. Do we remember this? Those that have been to Europe recently, how convenient it is to have the euro in countries that use it. The euro is actually in effect intergovernmentally until by 99. It's not actual coins that are used by by customers until 2002, and it sort of works. There are problems with it, of course, namely that some countries are honest about their national budgets and don't run too much of a debt, and others like Greece don't play fair, and they haven't been punished until recently. But at least it's better than let's beggar their neighbor and on and on and on. And John's, be patient here. There we go.
I'm sorry. Skip one.
Yeah, and then last to focus on the Bretton Woods Conference, the very first thing that happens. This is a lot of the stories here that you're familiar with are fantastically interesting. They remain interesting. People talking about needing a second Bretton Woods or a third Bretton Woods or whatever. Bretton Woods is nearly nothing more than a ski resort. Old building. Janet and I have been there. Anyone else raise their hand been this Bretton Woods? You can go, Bob Oxenberg has been there. You can visit room 219 where John Maynard Keynes was and his wife spent the time period there. It was only 3 weeks, I think. But you have leaders from 44 countries. Obviously, the big ones are going to be the dominant ones. They're going to come and meet there and say, let's come up with, let's discuss what was so wrong with the old world order that made World War II almost inevitable, and let's try and correct that so that at least those problems have been solved. Then the United States, of course, is going to be a huge key player, the key player, but the UK will be as well, because John Maynard Keynes, famous by everybody, will be there leading. And there's Keynes sitting there with his head down, sort of bald head, and he's sitting right next to, because it's the UK, right next to USSR. And back then, the Soviet Union was invited because they're still allies. Hitler hasn't been beaten yet. Japan hasn't been beaten. So they're negotiating there as well. But then you got smaller countries that are going to be there to be part of the proceedings, but not have a whole lot of influence. Things that come out of the Bretton Woods Conference that are still part of the landscape, and that some say, you know, it worked for a while, it was useful for a while, it was better than not having it, but it needs to be reformed. The IMF, an International Monetary Fund. The argument went, if there had been something like an international lender of last resort in 1929, when Germany went bankrupt, IMF, that organization, call it the IMF back then if you want, could have lent money to Germany. They'd have not gone into depression and been willing to vote for Hitler. Once the United States itself could no longer lend money because our banks had gone bankrupt, and Germany would have made it through a real financial crisis and continued on with the progress that it was been making after World War I. And Hitler would still been considered a nutcase, and there would have been no World War II. And the argument goes, we need something like that. The planet's got to have an international monetary fund to lend money to countries when they're in real trouble, because that trouble doesn't just mean that, oh, well, you made terrible mistakes and it's all your problem and just go ahead and suffer. Suffering produces craziness and fear in societies. Fear produces Donald Trumps and Bolsonaro's, and name them down the road. And the argument goes, well, it worked for a while. It hasn't worked as well as we thought recently. It is somewhat disturbing to the rest of the world these days that the building of the IMF is housed in 2 blocks from the White House in the United States, and the World Bank is in the same building. So that's but of course that was going to be the case in 1945. No one's going to dispute that made sense in 1940. Whether it still makes sense is an interesting question, according to the Chinese and other people. And there have been criticisms of the IMF recently. This is the IMF. This is the guy. This Korean guy is being polite when he says "I am effed." He puts fire, but really he meant something else. This is 1980. I should know this. John, Bob Oxenberg knows this for sure. I know this. What was this? 90. This would have been 97 when the Korean currency goes all the hell in handbasket, and Korea, for reasons which are not happy and not good, and not Korea's fault, frankly. And this guy's Korea's going to go into recession for reasons that are not really quite fair. The IMF bails them out, but the IMF also demands of Korea and every other country it bails out some pretty interesting requirements to get the loan, which basically mean that rich Western investors get bailed out while other people get fired. And so the IMF's got to be reformed. And another argument, another thing that comes out of the Bretton Woods Conference is say, let's create something that we will call GATT, the General Agreement on Trade and Tariffs. One of the problems back in preceding World War I and World War II was that countries started throwing up tariff barriers, refusing because stupidly thinking, oh, well, if we put up a tariff barrier, then everyone will. We're not going to import any stuff from any other country anymore because we're subsidizing them, and we'll just be self-sufficient. Of course, if part of your self-sufficiency is also exporting, and everyone else throws up tariff barriers, pretty much you're going to kill world trade pretty quickly, and that creates fear, and that creates nutcases that get elected like Hitler, and yada yada yada. And the argument was, let's have an organization, we'll call it GATT, that works to get countries to voluntarily not put up tariff barriers and work on free trade, rules-based economy, yada yada. It's in 93, somewhere in long leg, I think it's 93, 95. The GATT is transformed into the World Trade Organization, which now exists. And the World Trade Organization is stronger because it actually has enforcement powers. GATT didn't, it was all voluntary. And World Trade Organization has certainly worked to lower tariff barriers, create more free trade. There's problems with that, of course, but you can negotiate that. Here's a moment that the Chinese will remind us of. This is in 2000. China was not part of the World Trade Organization and had been asking to get in for years. The Clinton administration says we're going to work like crazy to get you in. It was even more awkward than this description here, and I shouldn't say that and then not deliver. But in any case, you can, if you look down to the bottom, the next to last paragraph, labor unions in the United States oppose us like crazy, saying you let China in the World Trade Organization. China's cheap labor is going to put a whole lot of us out of work. Of course, American corporations are saying this is fantastic. We got all this cheap labor over in China. And look at the vote down at the bottom. This is Clinton now. He's the president. It's mostly Republicans that are going to vote yes to let China in the World Trade Organization. Some Democrats join. Clinton is still being given crap about this by Fareed Zakaria and others. He'll still defend himself. Trump spent lots of time talking about how Hillary, because she was Clinton's wife, was part of this ruining American jobs. In any case, to not have a World Trade Organization or GATT is idiotic, but the argument does go that it has maybe been abused sometimes, and that needs to be reformed as well. What else? The World Bank, which sits, as I said, in the same building as the IMF, 2 blocks from the White House. You can see the Congress building off in the distance from the World Bank. The World Bank was set up to say, as a third organization, to say, we're going to soon, after World War II, have all sorts of former colonies become independent countries, and they're going to need help. And it would be better if there was some world organization to lend those former colonies money so they can improve their education, improve their sanitation, improve all the things they'll need to do to be functional countries, rather than depend on the free market to lend them money, because the free market may well say, Nigeria, you're a lousy bet. We're not going to lend you any money whatsoever. And the World Bank has done lots of pretty good stuff. And on the other hand, it gets criticized for being maybe too much in the loans too much in the interest of Western corporations and Western big projects like dams. Maybe the World Bank should spend more money lending microloans that work so well in Bangladesh. This is a standard criticism of some of these Bretton Woods organizations. what China would like to say, we need to reform this stuff. John's going to help me one again. I never know what I'm doing. I'd like to spend the last 5 minutes on this issue. This was a rather big deal at Bretton Woods. The argument of, so what's going to be the world currency? The so-called, we don't have a real world currency, but what's the effective world currency? It had been the pound for some time, which gave Britain an enormous benefit over every other country on the planet, when your country is the one most desirable to have as savings, because it essentially is a substitute world currency, the most trustworthy currency. Well, of course, in World War II, the pound can't hold up to that. The early in World War II, or I think no, before World War II, in the Depression, Britain goes off the gold standard, and we continue with the gold standard. So it's not going to be the pound. The U.S. is going to say we would like it to be the dollar, and after all, we've got 80% of the world's gold. We're the biggest country still standing in terms of economy, and John Maynard Keynes says no, that's not a good idea. Now, partly because he's from the UK and he's unhappy that Britain has lost its power, and there's that. But he's also a rather brilliant economist. He said, no, there should be something, a real international currency, not a currency that you can put in your pocket and use to spend on, but a bank-created currency which becomes an international exchange mechanism, like Visa cards or MasterCards or whatever. When people from one country with one currency buy something from another country with another currency, and that argument goes on. And these two guys really went at it. This book, were anyone interested, you can Google Ben Steele, the book, The Battle of Bretton Woods. It's C-SPAN 3 has got a 2-hour lecture by the guy that wrote this book. It's really, some of it is so much in the weeds, you go crazy. And if you're not interested in that, the little NPR podcast that's advertised down below here for 27 minutes. It's quite interesting on how these two battled out on which was going to make the most sense, and tried to convince the other 44 members of Bretton Woods which was going to work. And the fact that this interesting character, Harry Dexter White, ends up winning is such an odd story, and I'm not going to tell you why. Figure it out yourself. Part of it is because Keynes is in bad shape physically. Whatever. What did Keynes want? And this, some of you have heard this before. It is being proposed now and then. You'll never see it in newspapers. You'll never see it on NPR. But this is, the Chinese would say, yeah, the United States gets this incredible unearned advantage. Maybe it was earned in 45, 47, 52, 60 maybe, but no longer of being the world's currency. The US gets this enormous benefit, unearned, and it's not fair, and there should be something that's different. Now the Chinese would say we would like it to be the yuan. Keynes said, look, this is the way we set up the international trade. Only banks will use something that we can call whatever you want. He had various names, but he finally said, let's use this French term, bancors. Whenever there's dollars are going to be spent to buy something from Japan, which is in yen, the trade is going to be cleared by an international banking system based, and they will use this accounting mechanism we'll call bancors. And that's not any great innovation. Our MasterCard, Visa people and banks do this all the time, back and forth. But he said the issue is not so much the currency. The issue that we got to worry about is countries trying to outmaneuver one another by running surplus, trade surplus over and over and over again. He says when they do that, that's really not playing fair, and it creates problems for other countries. Equally so, countries that run endless trade deficits are also not playing fair. Most of them can't do that. But if you've got the currency of the world that everyone wants, like the United States, you could run deficits to the end of time, and the rest of the world will bail you out because they don't want, because the dollar is the international exchange. And Keynes would say it's really not fair. The United States citizens are getting away with an enormous subsidy from the rest of the world that is unearned, and so we should use a neutral accounting mechanism. And he said then the key to this whole mechanism is there will be a system set up that every country will be assigned. Now I'll go this. I'm saying this so fast and there's so much detail, and if it's all new to you, you'll never get it. So read up on it. But it is fascinating, this discussion that was made and was part of Bretton Woods, but it got canned by the United States. He said every country will be assigned yearly a sort of trade, a total amount of bancors that they have in an account in a central bank somewhere. Maybe it can be 1 block from Washington, D.C., who cares? And every time a country imports something, it's going to lose some of its bancors. It's every time it exports, it's going to gain some of its bancors. And if you accumulate, you'll be a limit to how much bancors you can accumulate. You're running a trade surplus. Once you go over that limit, you automatically have to depreciate your currency. Appreciate your currency. Use all the mechanisms you have at your power as a government to make your currency more valuable, meaning people are going to buy less of your stuff because it's now more expensive. Contrary-wise, if you're always running a deficit, and you go beyond your allowed quantity for deficit spending, once you go past that barrier, you have got to automatically depreciate your currency, make it worth less, meaning you can buy less from the rest of the world. And if you don't do it, we're going to the central bank is going to not only say you have to depreciate your currency, it's going to charge you a fee. Keynes argued no country is ever going to be so stupid as to go that far and have to pay a fee as well. And of course, if you're hearing this for the first time, you're saying, I don't get it. I didn't get it the first time I heard it either. But it does make some sort of sense to repeat. Then Chinese would say this in spades. The United States citizens are getting away with murder to some degree. Murder is a strong word, but we are deficit spending every year. We've been doing it every year since 1975, 76, I think. We always buy more from the world than we sell. And how are we able to do that? Well, other people lend us money. And why are they willing to lend us money? Because we got the world's currency. And that world's currency is sort of the clearinghouse currency for every trade around the planet Earth. And if we didn't have that, we would not be subsidized like that. And that is money that could go somewhere else to some more needy country that needs money, that needs to sell its stuff even more than we do. It could be loaned to Nigeria. It could be loaned to Chad. It could be loaned to, pick your favorite basket case country. But instead we get it, and we get it because we get the world's currency. And Keynes said, that's more fair. Of course, he lost. And the reason he lost, I'm going to leave as mysterious, because he should have never lost. He was more brilliant than this other guy, Dexter White. So what ended up in coming out of Bretton Woods is, okay, the U.S. will have the gold. The U.S.'s dollar is going to be the world currency, basically. It's going to be based on gold. And we're defining $35 to equal 1 ounce of gold. And every year, or at least every period of time, I don't know if it was every year, the conversion rate between dollars and other world currencies will be negotiated by governments, not by some open market arrangements. And that held till 71. What's happened in 71? Well, we were in recession. We had bad inflation because of Vietnam, because of the Great Society, because of other issues. And other countries said, we don't want your dollars anymore. We want your gold. And Nixon said, we don't have enough gold. We're off the gold standard. And ever since, who has determined the value of all international currencies? Well, the answer is in gold, and Bob Boxenberg, I assume, will jump in and help us out here. It's determined by the foreign exchange market. And if you're not aware of this, I was not aware of this until I read it long ago. Every single day, the foreign exchange market trades $6.6 trillion, maybe more than that these days. 2019 figures, exchanging money, basically speculating. It's speculating on the basis of research, not on guessing, on which currencies, which nation's currency is maybe overvalued. So we want to get rid of that because pretty soon it's going to lose some of its value. But we want to jump in and get rid of that currency before the collapse actually happens. Meanwhile, we want to buy currencies that look like they may go up some the other day. This happens.
Well, I know you want me to jump in, but actually I was never a foreign exchange trader. But I knew a lot of them.
You knew a lot of them. Okay. Bob, Bob's gonna jump in.
Just for a second. I mean, the volume is an interesting number, but it doesn't represent any underlying asset, except to the extent that goods are being traded and exchange has to be made between the dollar and whatever currency it is. So what you have is that each bank wants to provide a service of foreign exchange to its commercial clients, but also in the meantime, they want to provide liquidity, and they think they can make money out of providing liquidity. So they each internally have limits on their position in dollars and yen and euros and pounds, and the volatility of each currency is examined closely. The limits that each trading desk is allowed to maintain is highly constrained. But at the end of the day, I'll cut it off here. It just adds up to a lot of nominal value. And that's what the key word there, I think, is nominal. So yeah, it's a striking number, but it just comes out of the fact there are 1,000 banks all trying ultimately to provide exchange for their commercial clients who are shipping goods and shipping dividends even around the world.
And that is a useful and valuable service provided by banks, of course. But on the other hand, there's always the only goal is to earn at least a little bit of profit. And so,
well, also you're right about the speculation, because there are hedge funds who do not provide a basic service of exchanging currencies to settle up in accounts in one bank or the other bank. And hedge funds do a lot of speculation, but they can get their fingers burned as well. I mean, so it's a market clearing mechanism, and sometimes it goes a little bit bananas.
Well, one time that it went a little bit anonymous was 97, 98, when all these countries in orange were in the sights of the hedge fund managers who said, we think that these currencies are going to go down, and we want dollars instead of Thai baht, and or we want dollars instead of South Korean whatever, or we want dollars instead of Indonesian. And you can see over on the way far left the amount of value that some of these currencies lost in the space of weeks. And in the space of weeks, these economies just essentially collapsed, and enormous pain was thrown upon some of these citizens. Luckily, the IMF was there to bail them out, but the IMF then would demand certain repayment requirements, which were equally harsh, and basically we're going to bail out the Western investors to some degree.
So Indonesia going off the map in the upper left-hand corner, I think that's where George Soros made all his money.
Yeah, George Soros made a ton of money. George Soros made billions of dollars on Britain one year. It's pretty ugly stuff. And this is when the South Korean guy says, "I've been effed." And Russia was next. This was 99. This was the end of Yeltsin. Putin is going to be next in line. The IMF did not bail out Russia, and so it went to hell in a handbag. Argentina was after the line, and the argument goes, this is this was hedge fund stuff, and this shouldn't. This is not. If you're going to have exchange mechanisms, let's have governments arrange the exchange mechanisms back and forth, so that this kind of harm to citizens doesn't occur, which creates chaos in countries, the sense of fear, a sense of panic, election in democratic countries of horrible people, in non-democratic countries even more fear, and so forth. This is still going on. This could happen any day. Argentina's on the verge of bankruptcy yet again. And so the argument goes, there ought to be a better mechanism than this. Let's have a Bretton Woods 3. I hesitate to, now I'm going to say this. If a rather interesting moment came in '85, the so-called Plaza Accords. This was Reagan's presidency. It's called the Plaza Accords because it was negotiated in the Plaza Hotel. What was going on here? Well, during our tight money policy, we had this horrible inflation problem back in the 80s. I mean, the late 70s. This would sort of sound familiar. The Federal Reserve System under Paul Volcker took interest rates up to 21%, for God's sake. Well, that makes American people say 21%. Americans are selling government bonds that are denominated, that are going to give you 15% interest. I can't get enough of that stuff. Money just flowed into the United States like crazy, saying, I'll buy some of those government bonds. The United States is fantastically trustworthy on paying back its bonds. Well, of course, that's money that if it's coming to the United States, it's leaving somewhere else. There's somewhere around here, I think the value of the dollar went up like 50% compared to some other currencies. And other governments are saying, look, we're going into, we got a recession too, and we're in real trouble. The first response from the United States is, well, you know, we're the best in the world. It's just a vote in the United States economy. It's a dog-eat-world out there. Too bad. Luckily, James Baker, who was another secretary, said, you know, France, Britain, and so forth, they're right. We have got to we've got to come in and sort of manipulate the U.S. currency so it's depreciated, so it's worth less, so that some of this money flows back out of the United States. This was all government negotiated stuff to say, if we're going to have world peace, we can't beggar your neighbor so that we just benefit like crazy. And it's these kinds of moments where the Chinese are saying, isn't it overdue time that the world sort of reimagine its global rules? We're certainly not the strongest economy in the world, but we're one of the strongest. And we don't have any of the benefits that the United States in particular does because it's the world currency. And this sort of leads into what should be maybe a moment for a few questions here. I guess I'm going way too long. But so the argument, the question then is, are there questions out there about why the Chinese or many other countries would say it's overdue time for the world to rethink its financial rules, its financial safety net, if we're going to have world peace? Is that Bob Oxenberg? No, nobody.
Well, I can add. I mean, if I may, I'm not following it as close as I should, but we're actually living through in the last 3 or 4 months a similar experience with the dollar massively increased in value against other currencies, and it really is making it very tough on not just European countries but globally to manage their economies when the price of world commodities, which are all traded in US dollars, has risen to an extraordinary level. I mean, I'll put it in simpler terms, is that for the UK, for example, the pound has depreciated about, let me see, it's down 30 out of 140, so that's 20% or more in just 12 months. That's on top of its inflation of other other issues as well. So it's making inflation much more much higher in all those countries relative to the US. US has got a huge benefit at the moment in trying to tamp down inflation because of the fact that the dollar price of commodities is less impactful on the country of the US dollar. So the Japanese are a bit pissed. The Brits are very pissed. Everybody's pissed at the moment.
Does that to confirm then the point that the Chinese would make over and over again and others would make over and over again? The United States is getting away with, because of a deal made at Bretton Woods back in 1945, benefits which are not earned, and they're causing great pain in other parts of the world. And it's overdue time for the United States to face up to the fact that this should be negotiated if we're really honest about so-called world peace, which in theory was what this was all about back in 1945. We can't, never again, that famous phrase of never again. Well, the never again, of course, if you're a Syrian, this happened. If you're in some of the Central African countries, which don't get any rain anymore, it's happened. So never again is kind of sad because it's happening again. Too grim to well, and so this, in hopes, if next week, I'm going to turn it over to John next week, or to anyone who's got the time to read that really rather well-written 13-page special report in China that John sent out 3 or 4 times, or if you don't have time to read the report, just read the various quotes that he's called from it, arguments that the Chinese are saying. We will lead the way. We got the power to lead the way. We got the will to lead the way these days. Now, of course, much of what China is doing is self-serving. What a surprise! And so the goal for anyone that wants to engage in discussion next week, I think, John, would be, can we sort out what is legitimate about trying to rejigger a world financial order, world rules, world IMFs and so forth, and what is just flat out China being, because it's powerful now, being a bully and trying to be self-serving, which is quite a challenge.
So any thought been given to bringing back the idea of the Bancor? I know the Greek finance minister, the Marxist Yukov Flanoxis, or whatever his name was, talked about that for a while.
It shows up periodically, but the average person says, I have no idea. This is completely crazy. A world currency? Well, it's not a world currency. It is. But it's a bank currency only, as the euro was for 3 years before it actually became a currency that you could put in your pocket. And you didn't have to have that. You could still have marks and Italian lira. It's just much more convenient to have a single currency, I suppose. Yeah.
We're getting pretty close to an hour. We started a little bit late. I think we'll keep it open for a few more minutes of questions that you want to ask this week. But next week, we'll for sure will be mostly audience participation and thoughts. Look at either the whole article or what we extracted and excerpted from it that we think are talking points. But if you find other talking points you want to submit, you could submit them in advance and we could put up a slide and be ready. The whole idea is to have general participation. We even threw in a quiz this week where a few people participated.
Well, I threw in a quiz for next week, and it's in the chat.
Oh, you got a quiz?
Okay, thank you.
My suggested quiz is in the chat.
All right,
Okay,
all right.
Okay, then I'd better save the chat before I end the program. Thank you for that, Harold. Any other comments?
Well, I have a question.
John, Aiko's got a question.
So if you want to rejigger this whole system, obviously everybody is gonna,
Be self-serving.
yeah, self-serving. So how can you rejigger it fairly?
Well, you're asking a question about how does democracy work, huh? In World War II, after World War II, it was easy. People said, we can't go through this again, and we're willing to give up a fair amount to a fair amount of power. Some of us have given up the power non-voluntarily because we just destroyed our economies in World War II. But there's got to be an honest discussion about this. Humanity can't afford to go through this over and over again. It's been twice now in 30 years. If you were, just to repeat maybe excessively, if you were Syrian, or if you were a recently, what's the country that's just where its citizens, its farmers are now moving, they've just given up. Is it Niger or Nigeria? I think it is Nigeria. They moved to Chad, but they got no water now. And they say we can't. They're moving to Chad. Well, Chad doesn't have much water either, but it's got more than northern Nigeria. Not only do we have no water, we've got Boko Haram, which comes and kills us and steals our daughters. Say, well, those people count too, but of course they don't get to the table is the argument, but the contrary argument is, well, they are getting to the table. They've come. They're desperate, so they come into Europe, and then Europe turns anti-immigrant because they don't know what the Swedes don't know what to do with all these black people who have nowhere else to go because they're dying. A small, tiny little anecdote. When Jen and I were in Ethiopia a couple of years ago, one of the nicest people we met. We befriended him. We subsidized. We sent a couple of dollars here or there to keep his family from going bankrupt. He wrote 2 years ago, said, "I'm leaving. I can't raise my family here. We're all going to starve to death. I'm going to try and get to Europe. If I make it, I'll be in contact with you." 2 years we haven't heard a word from him. So this is a nice person with 2 kids and a wife and so forth. And those stories, there's thousands and tens of thousands of those stories all over the planet. And you have too many of those, and you just have Lebanese have no economy left anymore. That kind of fear and nastiness said, well, I'll join ISIS or I have no other way to raise my family. And I may as well die going down fighting rather than die going down just sitting on the side of the road and suffering. And there's an awful lot of them on the planet, and then we haven't even mentioned global warming again. So you'd have to have some sort of a spiritual leader standing up there and say, "Look, you jerks, you're here to serve humanity, not to serve your country. And if you can't serve your country, get out of this room." But if we're back to it's a free world. All the libertarians deserve all the wealth they earn because they're just the most brilliant sons of bitches in the world. Say, wait a minute, you're living in a democracy with a government with freedoms. You try, Elon Musk, try doing that in Nigeria and see how much goddamn money you can make. And then before you're bumped off as an egotistical asshole. I guess I'm overstating it. I'm turning this over.
That's how you really feel, Ramsey.
Yeah. Other than that, how the Warriors doing?
Right. And Ramsey, there's another end, which is, the sort of other extreme, and not that I'm a fan, is the Bitcoin electrically traded, attempt to sort of create somewhat of a world financial peace. It's all kinds of problems. There's nothing that's tied to, but somewhere in there, there's probably an interesting question about, is the Bitcoin the other end of the spectrum of a very empowered, young, technocratically, tied to the computer system, but way beyond my league.
I'll just put in a couple of points. Why is it the people have confidence in the American dollar? I think it probably has something to do with our military strength. So there's that. But the whole idea of credit, Yuval Harari has come out now with a new children's book, or it's designed to explain his theories of the world to kids. Now, what's a kid? Maybe it's for teenagers. But he makes a point that money is an abstraction. It's nothing.
Right.
It's nothing. And it's what you believe it is. And the whole idea of credit is what people think psychologically that something is going to be credit worthy. So we can get into some of that, but maybe we should take a look at this kid's version of Yuval Harari. Ramsey had us read one of his books, which was very interesting, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. So there's a lot of other things out there. Yes, Aiko.
David, Bitcoin would favor a certain group as well, though.
Oh, totally. It's, as I said, it's the
Yeah,
other
so, I
extreme.
mean,
It's
you
not,
know-
it's not the Nigerian poor black farmer. It's the white
No,
technocrat.
definitely not.
Right. No, and I'm not a fan. I don't want to, I'm just saying who knows, but it's kind of some polarization balance to the black Nigerian farmer, the white technocratic geek.
Well, but
Well,
it's
can I make a couple of comments there?
Yeah.
Bitcoin or other crypto coins have no state or corporate intermediaries.
Right.
And I would have thought some of you would have been arguing strongly in favor of a means of exchange, which did not have to create profits for financial intermediaries. And secondly, the comment I would make is that I'm not sure it's just for white geeks in Silicon Valley. When you talk about other currencies, don't forget, and you're all familiar with this, that for example in Kenya and actually in many other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, a heavily used means of exchange is minutes on a cell phone.
Yeah.
And you exchange minutes to pay for things. And it's, it's transferable from phone to phone. You don't need to go down to your bank in Nairobi. It's worth looking, if you're not familiar with that, it's worth looking into. It's a great means of exchange.
Well, that's better than silk on the Silk Road or salt, which was worth its weight.
Somebody sets the rate, though, that rate of exchange, right?
Well,
I mean, it's not.
It's a market.
It's a free market.
market.
You bargain every day,
Well,
every minute.
retiring practices.
Okay, we're definitely at an hour now. So I really look forward to continuing this. I think we've worked out the problems that we had, technical problems, and see y'all next week.
All
Okay,
right.
you.
Great
Thank
discussion.
you.
Thanks, Ramsey. Thanks, John.
Thank you so much. This is wonderful.
Good.
So